Ladies and gentlemen, as you remember, about a year ago, the commission requested that we identify a subject matter expert to come in and answer any questions that commission members may have regarding the use of cannabis. Dr. Alcoin and Ms. Adair, I've included their bios in the section. They have been gracious enough to come to the commission and provide additional guidance and to answer any questions we have. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Doctor.
Thank you. The purpose of this is twofold. One is I'm going to give a brief background on marijuana. The purpose of that is so you'll understand why all municipalities, states, federal agencies are changing rules right now on marijuana testing. So in order to understand why they're changing the rules and regulations, we need to understand what happens when you consume marijuana in your body, what are they looking for, and why are all these changes being made currently in the government. So what is marijuana? Marijuana is also called weed, herb, pot, grass, bud, a bunch of names with it. Basically, it's a plant, greenish-gray mixture of dried flowers of Cannabis sativa. That's the plant where the marijuana comes from. Again, some people smoke marijuana, handle cigarettes called joints, pipes, water pipes, bongs, blunts, and of course, most popular recently is the vaping that everybody is doing. Where does marijuana come from? Cannabis sativa plant. There is a male version of the flower, there's a female version of the flower, and without saying the female version is much more potent than the male version, I left that out. My wife made me take that out. So, female plants are more potent than male plants, and they will bring a higher value when they're sold. What strains of marijuana are there? If you go to a marijuana dispensary, they have just massive amount of marijuana. Well, what they've done is all the different types of marijuana that are sold and manufactured have different concentrations of CBD, which you'll see in a minute, and THC in them. Different ratios, different amount, different concentrations. Depending on those concentrations and some of the other chemicals they add to the marijuana, like they do cigarettes, gives you different feelings. So, for example, this is kind of hard to see, pain relief, Acapulco Gold, Blue Dream. So basically, they've named all the marijuana strains, fun names, but they basically have different things they will provide you. If you want relax, you want pain relief, energy, creativity, sleep aid. So they're all formulated to give you these benefits. So when you walk into a dispensary, you order basically what you want based on what the outcome is to be. And again, we'll show you, just to give you an idea, this is California's sales. Remember, there's only 39 million people in California. Blue Dream was the #1 seller in last year. $91 million of one type of marijuana strain in California, legally sold. This isn't illegally sold, this is legally sold. Gelato, $50 million. Pineapple Express, and some of you that are my age will remember the movie Pineapple Express is basically a drug movie. Sold last year $42 million. It just goes on from there. But if you add these up, it's the amount of money being spent is staggering compared to the population. So a lot of this is being sold, a lot of money being generated by the legal sale of marijuana, at least in California. Again, those are just some of the flavors that are sold. How you can get marijuana, you can buy soda, you can go get Coke, Diet Coke, root beer, lemon lime, it has marijuana in it. It's usually a low level amount. You can go to the gummies, they have 5 milligrams in them each. You can go to get the joint, which has 50 milligrams in it, and then the chocolate bars, that one little chocolate bar has 100 milligrams of THC in it. People that are chronically use marijuana could probably handle that, but a normal person like myself, which we were obviously not allowed to consume anything being a federal drug testing director, it would probably knock me unconscious, be in the hospital. It's that strong and that potent. But these are some of the things that you can go buy every day in dispensaries to consume THC. This is, again, just an idea of when you buy a legal product, when you go buy something from a dispensary, they have to tell us, this one's called Skittles, that's the name. You see all these fun names that they have, which isn't good for kids. It says the name of the strain, the type, whether it's a flower, a vape, an edible, an extract. This one's a flower. It says the amount of THC, what percent is in there. This one's 25.9%, rather high. CBD, we'll get into what those are and what they mean in a minute, has only 1.1%, and then the package has 3.5 grams, when it was packaged, and the batch number. So those are the things that are required to be on a legal package in California to be sold at a dispensary. So now we're getting to the important part of why all the rules and stuff are changing. So basically, what happens when you consume marijuana? Marijuana itself has a compound called THC with a small a. So don't confuse that when you get a drug test result back when it's THC with a capital A. It's a completely different compound. So when you get the plant, it has THCA in it. If you were to eat that plant, you would get no effect other than getting upset stomach, because the THC form in the plant is not psychoactive. You may get nauseous and sick, but it's only from eating a lot of plants, not from the marijuana itself. So when you take the THC that's in the plant and you heat it up, smoke it, vape it, it converts from THCA, which is an inactive, non-psychoactive compound, to THC. THC is the psychoactive compound that people get high from. It's what caused the effect. The different types of effect you get are based on the ratio of the THC to the CBD. And we'll get into that in just 1 second. So after you heat it up, you smoke it, you vape it, the edibles are all cooked, pre-cooked, so they have pure THC in them. Then it comes down to, it travels through the body to the bloodstream, causing well-known effects, which you normally associate with marijuana, into the liver. The liver metabolizes it several times. The first time it metabolizes it to another psychoactive compound, but it only lasts a few minutes. So the government is not monitoring that compound because it doesn't exist long enough for it to be detected. Then the liver metabolizes to THC carboxylic acid. That's a THC-C00H, glucuronide. That's the one that the federal government currently monitors because it'll come out in your feces and your urine. That is non-psychoactive. And the last thing again is, of course, it comes out via mostly in the urine and the stool. So basically the plant does not have any psychoactive compounds present in it when you pull it out of the ground. It has to be chemically treated, heated, processed in order to get that psychoactive effect, which is very important when we get to the rules. So this is the whole key behind what you'll understand with the state rules. So you have the cannabis sativa plant. In the plant, it has over 100 different cannabinoids, many different types of cannabinoids. It also has a THCA, which is non-psychoactive, and it has CBDA, which is non-psychoactive, okay? So you get, those are the two main things that we're tracking here in the government, the federal government will track in the marijuana. After you process, smoke it, vape it, heat it, you'll end up with either Delta 8, 9, 10, 11, THC, which are all psychoactive, but at different levels. Delta 9 is the most, it's the most common one, so that's the one that's monitored by the government, and you get CBD. CBD in itself is not considered psychoactive. So that's why the manufacturers of marijuana plants and candy and edibles will regulate the different amounts of CBD versus THC. The reason for that is THC and CBD are chemically the same structure. They have the same chemical atomic mass unit structure. A little different configuration, but they're identical. So in your brain you have receptors. So when you smoke marijuana and it's THC, it binds on these receptors in your brain, which basically stimulate your dopamine. And dopamine is what makes you happy, feel good, hungry, I want this, I want that, I'm in a good state of mind. So that's why you get the pleasure from the marijuana that you do. CBD binds the exact same receptors as THC, the exact same. So if you have a candy product or something and you want the person to feel good, but not completely so high and wasted they can't function, they mix higher and higher levels of CBD in the product to balance out the effects of THC. So when people get nauseous with THC, they buy products with higher percents of CBD in them because it counteracts that nauseating kind of euphoric effect you get, but it does make a lot of people sick. So if you get a pure THC product with no CBD in it, it's going to be strong and it'll be a lot of euphoric effect. The higher the CBD percent, it tends to mellow out that THC. Manufacturers are well versed on all of this. They want to sell something that makes you feel good, but they don't want you to get sick. So that's why they balance out, especially in these gummies. that we showed a little earlier, there's almost the same amount of CBD as there in THC, because they want you to take the candy, they want you to be happy, feel good, have a good time, so you're going to spend another $100 on another container. These Delta 8s are just different versions of the marijuana. Right now, the federal government monitors 9. If you go to Florida right now, you can buy 8 legally. I think in Maryland, you can buy 8 legally. You also get the CBD. So you metabolize it, you get the carboxylic acid of THC. This is what comes out in the urine. It's non-psychoactive. And then you get eliminated in the feces. Okay, so here's again the nomenclature. You guys have all this, hopefully. So the THC, it's a name, non-psychoactive. CBDA, non-psychoactive. THC, psychoactive. The CBD, even after treated with heat, chemicals, and all that, it's non-psychoactive. And it competes with the THC to help mellow out the effect of THC. This 11-hydroxy-THC only lasts for a matter of minutes in your body. It is also psychoactive. But again, because it's only in your body for a few minutes, it's not a good chemical to detect to see if someone's under the influence or not. And then, of course, the end product, which the federal government now mandates the only marijuana allowed to be tested by a laboratory, is this carboxylic acid, which is the metabolite that comes out in the urine and the feces. The potency is this: Delta 11, 9, 8, and 10. And then CBD is the last. And what this means is if you had a plant that had pure Delta 11 in it, it would be the highest one that you'd be intoxicated for. And it goes down from there. In a normal marijuana plant, however, Delta 9 is by far the most common. So here you have potency, how strong it is, from strong to weak. Abundance is how much is actually in an average marijuana plant, with Delta 9 being the highest, Delta 8 being the lowest. And that's why a lot of times the government agencies don't care about Delta 8, because you can get a little bit high off of it, but you have to smoke and smoke and smoke and smoke a lot of it to get the same effect you get from a Delta 9 joint or marijuana consumption. So basically, the general effects you have marijuana consumption, you have that massive dopamine release, which is why people that smoke chronic marijuana are always hungry, but somehow they're super skinny, which can drive you nuts. So greater appetite and thirst affects depression, anxiety, memory problems, impaired judgment, delayed reactions. You've all seen that with people high, paranoia, hallucinations, withdrawals, and addiction. So again, I think most people are especially in this room, are very cognitive of what someone who's high on marijuana looks like and what their activities are, because you guys deal with it all day long. So these are the main effects. So now we're getting into a little bit of the testing. What do we actually test for? So now we know that THC itself is psychoactive. We know that CBD is not, and we know that there's many, many versions of THC out there. So what do we do? What can we test for? This is a screening analyzer. They're about $500,000. This is what we use to do the screening test for marijuana. It can't tell the difference between CBD, THC, Delta 8, Delta 9, Delta 10, Delta 7. It can't tell the difference. It simply knows that there's a type of marijuana in your urine, your oral fluid. We use different instruments for hair, sweat patches, and things like that. But this is a general analyzer testing liquid matrices for any type of marijuana type compound in it. This is a LC-MS-MS. There are different types of these confirmations. There's a GCMS, LCMS, and then there's tandem liquid and tandem gas. These are the ones that can go down to, they can test for both the THC carboxylic, Delta 8, Delta 9. So these instruments, unlike the screening analyzer, can test for any one of those specific compounds that a government agency may request us to test. So these are testing the molecular weight, the molecular structure of the compound. They're very sensitive. Okay, what do the results mean? If both a screening test and a confirmation test isn't performed, it would meet forensic standards in that a sample is being tested using two independent methods and procedures, and both results yielded the same result. If THC is positive, if THC is found positive in a person, think of it as like currently alcohol is right now. If THC is found positive in a person, the government agency will then deem that individual under the influence of a psychoactive compound, and they will suffer those punishments or whatever the laws and rules and regulations are of that jurisdiction. So if THC is found, a person is under the influence of marijuana. That's very important to remember. So it's under the psychoactive. If THCA, or the carboxylic acid THC, is found present, that means the person has used or consumed marijuana. It does not mean the person is under a psychoactive compound. It means that they've consumed marijuana in the past. And here's basically the meaning and the reason behind, if you read in all the rules and regulations, all the way from the city of Berkeley to the federal government, this is the bottom line that they're all trying to get across. If a person is restricted from being under the influence of marijuana while on the job, then the presence of THC found in their system is a violation. So they are under the influence of a psychoactive compound. Just like if you're driving, you pulled over and you're found with the presence of alcohol, you're considered under the influence. You may have had a fifth of whiskey last night, but at that moment in time, you are found to be under the influence because you had alcohol in your system. So it doesn't really matter when you consume the alcohol. The fact is, are you under the influence at this exact second that you were tested? So again, if the rule is that you don't want someone to be under the influence at the time they're on the job, they're driving, they're out with a gun in public or whatever, THC will tell them whether they're under the influence at that exact time the collection took place. If the restriction is from using marijuana while employed, then the presence of carboxy THC in the urine would be a violation. Meaning that if you're an airline pilot or a flight attendant or a bus driver or a DOT truck driver, they don't want you consuming marijuana at all for any reason at any time. So even if you smoked something 30 days ago, or you took a candy bar 30 days ago, and you're now being collected today, and you're found with the presence of carboxy THC in your system, it is a federal violation and you will suffer those consequences. So it's the purpose of the testing that really should drive what you test, what matrix you test and what chemical you test for marijuana. These are average detection times. You can go to the literature and find everything from one extreme to the other, but these are averages. So if you have an acute, meaning you smoked it just once, you're not a chronic user, in blood you can detect for about 2 hours, urine 4 days, oral fluid about 5 hours, hair, you can't really detect THC that well. Chronic, 5 hours in blood, 75 days in urine, 18 hours oral fluid, 90 days in hair. And again, what you detect in blood, THC is what you'll find in blood, urine, the THC carboxylic acid. Oral fluid, you'll find THC, and hair, you'll find THC. So those are the things that you'll detect in certain matrices, and those are the average detection times. Now, so that's what marijuana is, that's how it affects your body, that's what comes out, and that's what you test, what you can test and determine whether someone's under the influence or has consumed marijuana. Now we're getting into what the federal and state laws currently are. So this is a little history. Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 allowed the importation, cultivation, possession, and distribution of marijuana under federal regulations. The annual fee to manufacture, sell, whatever, was $24, and you had to buy these stamps. This one stamp, if you were to have it today, I think it's sold on eBay for like 10 grand or something. So these are worth a lot of money nowadays. But anyways, you buy just like alcohol stamps. Again, we keep going back to that alcohol as an example. Alcohol, you have to buy the stamps, basically the seals. Imported rum from Jamaica, you got to pay that tax. The same exact scenario they did back in 1937. 1970, Controlled Substances Act 1970 banned all forms of cannabis, including hemp. DEA in 2014, marijuana is a Schedule I drug, potential for addiction, no medical current use. But they did start making synthetic marijuana, which is a Schedule II drug, Dramamine, Marinol, so there's Schedule II and Schedule III drugs. So what they're saying is, well, if you have marijuana on the street, it's illegal, it's a Schedule I, but if we manufacture it and we sell it, we're going to Schedule II and Schedule III. So that's kind of weird. Just as your information, this is something that happened a few years ago. When they made Marinol as a scheduled drug, it was Delta 8. So a laboratory 10 years ago was able to tell the difference between Marinol and street marijuana. Just like today, we're able to tell the difference between street meth and meth that's in a Vicks inhaler, because the government has dictated what form of methamphetamine that Vicks can put in their inhaler versus what type of methamphetamine you find on the street. So we can tell the difference in a laboratory. 10 years ago, we could tell the difference between Marinol and marijuana. Nowadays, with marijuana cards, prescriptions, you don't get that difference anymore. The Farm Bill Act of 2018, again, the Farm Bill Act comes out every year. It's an annual renewed thing by Congress. They just make changes certain years. So in 2018, they allowed for the sale, distribution, and possession of cannabis plant as long as it contains less than 0.3% THC. And the growers of that must have a license as well. So when I go to court often on marijuana as a nurse or a doctor, we always have this come up, well, I used hemp, I chewed hemp, I smoked hemp. So if I smoke enough of it, it's like taking near beer at the grocery store. Well, if I have 25 cans of near beer, I'm going to be positive for alcohol, but it's a lower concentration. So that's the argument of this Farm Bill Act, is that the government allowed the sale of hemp, which is less than 0.3%, and you can see the products we talked about earlier up to 25% THC. But again, in court, you get that argument quite a bit, and it's usually it's easily discussed and moved on to another thing. In 2024, February 1st, federal employees, the presence of carboxy-THC in urine is a violation. However, in oral fluid, THC is a violation. So now we have even the federal government saying that if we test you for oral fluid, which is now legal in the federal government to test oral fluid, you have to detect THC, which means the person is under the influence of THC at the time the oral fluid was collected and tested. However, if you're testing urine, 60 days ago, you smoked pot, and I find you present today, violation. So even the federal government now rules as of February 1st, 2024, have both scenarios. You test urine, it can go back 60, 90 days. You test oral fluid, it's a 5 to 7 hour intelligence test. Again, possession. This is the state, so the black ones legalized possession, the dark green medical and decriminalization. That means that the penalties for possession have been dramatically reduced. Some states have even reversed every decision for the last 10 years. Decriminalized, light green, and then the gray is CBD with THC only, and then fully legal. So that's possession of marijuana rules. And then right here, there's a, you don't need to worry about these slides per se. Maryland's up there. At the very end, there should be, okay, right here. If you go to this website, it's an awesome website for the current rules in your state. So you can go to that website, you can pull it up, and you can get the current rules of what's going on in legislation in your state. Obviously, we don't want to go through 50 states this morning because I'd be on the floor. So, but anyways, it's a really good website for state-by-state legalization. And again, marijuana, or Maryland, you can go back here in the possession rules, and then we go to state rules, you can look that up. Employment, green protects recreational users. Cities of Atlanta, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, Baltimore, Rochester, blah, 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 protect city workers from the use of marijuana. So there's special rules in Baltimore to protect city employees that use marijuana. What the details of that are, you can look up, but there are special rules that have been filed. Employment, brown protects medical users from any discrimination, hiring, and testing. And those are the states which cover those laws. Connecticut law specifically that a positive marijuana test alone does not necessarily indict impairment. So again, every state, in Berkeley and California, have their own rules and recommendations. Trends. This is what we are seeing with all the new rules and changes. Removal of marijuana for pre-employment testing. Almost every agency that and I've been doing federal drug testing now for 40 some years. What we've seen is removal of marijuana from pre-employment testing. Agencies almost every month will now be pulling out marijuana from their testing. Los Angeles County, state of California, they're removing marijuana as a pre-employment test. It's too controversial, it's a legal hassle for them, so they're pulling it out for the exact reasons that we talked about earlier. Proof of impairment. More and more employers are making sure that someone's impaired before they're taking action against them. Obviously with the marijuana rule, if you're under the influence of carboxy-THC and as you're an employee, I smoked it three weeks ago, now I'm in trouble, that's not fair to me. So most of them have gone to proof of impairment, which is that THC rule. When you test for THC, just like the federal government does now, it proves that the person was impaired at the time of the collection. Medical use is excused like any prescription for drug testing. Just so you get an idea, in the federal drug testing program, opiates were excused 99.9% of the time of all federal employees. Airline pilots, flight attendants, truck drivers, 99.9% of the time when they had an opiate positive, the medical review officers waived it off as a negative. February 1st, they changed that. The MROs now have to report to the federal government why they waived that opiate positive result by the donor. So they're obviously going after those type of people. But medical marijuana, the same thing. We will turn out a positive marijuana on a person or employee. The medical review officer, if they find a prescription or a valid reason for that, they're tending to reverse that and report out a negative result from the drug testing laboratories. Safety sensitive positions are positions that require non-impairment or seem to be protected. So if you're a police officer, if you're the airline pilots, the flight attendants per se, all those that are in safety sensitive positions, and construction, which was a strange one that came up in California. Construction workers, anybody that has to have a background check for a job, a federal background check for a job, basically was waived from these new programs. So they're still following the old rule. If they find you're not supposed to have marijuana ever. So if you're under a safety sensitive job and you've had a federal background check in order to be employed, then the rule then tends to be, we don't want you smoking marijuana. It doesn't matter if it was a month ago or 2 days ago, you shouldn't do it in our job. And that's our policy, that's our rule, and the federal government actually backs and supports that. Fun things here, I only got 2 seconds left. So these are true false. No one has ever fatally overdosed on marijuana. That's true, no one has, because it takes 1,500 pounds of marijuana smoke in 15 minutes to kill you. 4 minutes, I'm kind of smoking here. Cannabis sativa has an uneven number of leaves. These are just fun things. So the plants, they can have 5, 7, or 9 leaves, but it's always uneven. Cannabis has been found in cloves. Think about this: cloves, black pepper, broccoli, ginseng, and carrots. So don't put pepper on your broccoli. The red eyes are not caused by, and this is one thing I was even messed up on. Red eyes are not caused by marijuana smoke. I think people that sit in a car and smoke marijuana, their eyes are always bloodshot. I think because they're around smoke, their eyes are bloodshot. No, it's the blood pressure that marijuana causes in their eyes. The detection of THC is down to 1 picogram. So let me give you an idea of how sensitive the equipment is that we buy today. If you took a $1 bill and you cut it up into 1 trillion pieces, that one of the trillion pieces, that instrument can detect now marijuana. That's how sensitive the equipment is that we're buying today. Marijuana is not chemically addictive like heroin or methamphetamine. That's true, but its effects are very addictive. So if you do heroin and you stop taking heroin, you can literally die by stopping to take heroin addiction. You can stop, you go withdrawals, it can kill you. Marijuana, if you stop taking it, won't kill you, but you have the massive withdrawals from the pleasure that you're missing. So it's a different type of addiction with marijuana as it is to a hardcore opiate. Marinol, again, true, false, these are all true, but Marinol was approved by the FDA in 1985 to treat nausea from chemotherapy. It's still legally prescribed in all 50 states for that purpose. A lot of HIV medication, chemotherapy, they will prescribe marijuana to help deal with the vomiting and nausea. And again, the FDA has approved THC for chemotherapy, epilepsy, HIV, MS under evaluation. So they're looking at kids with epilepsy right now. I have a stepson, 4-year-old, who has epilepsy. And one of the things they're evaluating is giving the kids marijuana to curb the epilepsy attacks. Same thing with children with MS. They're giving them marijuana right now under studies, federal studies, to see if it will help with the MS and the effects that it has. So,
Any questions?
I got one. I think the first workaround we, come across with a lot of the applicants is CBD oil or CBD itself, where they use that to say, hey, I know I'm a chronic marijuana user. However, I say CBD oil that's coming up, or CBD oil that I need.
The technology that we have in the laboratory, at least if it's a federally licensed laboratory, can easily tell the difference between CBD and THC and Delta 8, Delta 9. Every blind proficiency test we get every 3 months has a fake THC sample in it to make sure we can do that. So we can tell the difference. Now, on the screening side of it, yeah, a lot of those are going to screen positive for marijuana, but when you do a confirmation, that's when you will be able to tell the difference between Delta 8, 9, 10, 11, and CBD oil.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
What's your experience in federal litigation? Are you like an expert?
Yes.
So have you been called in any state cases, since most of our litigation for terminations sometimes can end up in federal court, even though marijuana in Maryland is legal? And then you go into federal court with this case of wrongful termination, or worse, a lawsuit because the train,
The bus driver.
The bus driver
bus
was-
stop. Yeah, we get that quite a bit.
so what is the federal courts looking at? So when one of my, some decisions we have to make about some of this stuff, we're going to end up in federal court in civil actions against our jurisdictions, against us personally. So what's your experience with
So
federal
I
court?
do go to court a lot, and I've done a lot of federal, because I'm only one of 18 federal licensed labs in the United States, in the world, for the U.S. government, so I do a lot of that. Basically, the laboratory's portion of it is what you identified them to have. And then the question is always, were they under the influence of at the time? And that's where you run into a problem with the old federal rules is, you may not be under the influence of marijuana. Like if you're a bus driver in Los Angeles, which somehow they are high all the time. So, and they run over cars and park benches and everything. So, but the issue there is, were they under the influence at the time of the accident? If it's carboxylic acid, THC, they may have consumed it 3 or 4 weeks ago. The answer is no, they may have not been impaired at the time. Okay, so that's rule. The new rules that are coming in with THC would in fact show that someone was impaired at the time of the accident, because if they did an oral fluid test or a blood test at the time of the accident, which they're required to do, then they would see THC present now, and they could punish or take on that they were under the influence at the time of the accident. California, I think, even has the right that if you're a motor vehicle driver and they believe you're under the influence of marijuana, they do have the right to take your blood and see if it had THC in your blood, which will show that you're impaired at the time of the accident. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of cases that they're dismissing under the influence unless it was proved under the influence. So if it's it's the THC acid at the end that the old federal government had until February 1st, then you can't prove impairment. And when you go to court and there's a fatality involved, usually that's what they're trying to get to. Were they impaired at the time? Were the parents under the influence of fentanyl at the time? So we do a lot of that. Fentanyl is a different story, because if you have fentanyl in your urine and you just killed someone, normally they'll buy that as under the influence at the time, because it's only a matter of hours before it'll go away. So it just depends on the drug and the situation. But again, usually it comes down to, can you prove that there may or may not have been impairment at the time this action took place?
And we're talking about that 5 to 7 hour window.
In some cases, yeah, with THC, yes. Oral fluid THC is about
So we would
5
have
to
no
7
way of
hours.
knowing, working 12-hour shifts, how people are working 12-hour shifts, if they smoked right before their shift, shot somebody 2 hours in, and then the testing doesn't get done 5, 6, 7 hours after an incident, whether they were under the influence at the time.
That is possible. That is possible. But we're finding that most of the time, the THC does still have some detection level in it, that we can, especially down at these new levels that we can get, we can see it for quite a long time. But the cutoffs that the government established is what kills it about 7 to 9 hours is their screening cutoff, is what stops it, not the limit of the instrument. The instruments could probably detect THC consumption 24, 36 hours afterwards, but the government put a cutoff in there. So if it's above the cutoff, it's positive, drops below it, it's going to be negative, even though it may be present in the person.
In light of that, would you suggest that we enact policies that if an officer's involved in an incident, that they're tested for THC immediately, or like shortly thereafter?
If the jurisdiction requires someone to be under the influence at the time of the incident, that tends to carry more weight in court now than the old THCA. Now we do have a lot of jurisdictions that if you're a flight attendant, you come off a flight or a Python flight and you're positive THC, they don't care if you smoked it 3 weeks ago. It's just like you smoked it while you're flying the plane. So their rules are very strict about that. But it depends on what your rules and jurisdiction. If a person in the state of Maryland that carries a weapon, discharges a weapon, is not supposed to have any marijuana in their system ever as part of their employment, then if you tested THC-A, they'd be violating that policy. So it's what your policy is. But as far as impairment goes, that's why we stepped into this new world of like alcohol testing, where THC seems to be the impairment now versus the I took it 3 weeks ago excuse. Yes, ma'am.
And is it, you are comparing THC to alcohol a lot, but when we think of testing for alcohol, we think of impairment, we think of testing, the test result being over a certain level. And so with THC, is it that it's
Same thing.
over a
Yep.
certain level? And so is that threshold pretty much consistent across, is that another?
The federal government has established what it is for jurisdictions. And what I found, especially in federal court when I testify, if you go to court and you testify and you tested something based on federal statutes, I've never lost a case as is, but when you're a federal lab and you use federal mandated cutoffs, we've never had an issue in court. Now, we do have some correctional facilities we test for, which are basically, if we see anything at all, you're in trouble. But those are people that don't have the same rights as your general public, out there. So these are people that are incarcerated, they've lost a lot of their rights, so we're trying to see if they're on any kind of drug whatsoever. But the general public, if we follow federal statutes, we've had no issues in court. Federal court, state courts, local courts, it's been fine. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm just very curious about the long-term effects, especially on the brain and the limbic system.
Terrible.
Can you tell me more? Is it the hippocampus, the hypothalamus?
It's what happens is, so if you're a weekend user, you have the fun and the sex and the food and all that kind of thing. Once you're a chronic user, the brain completely starts your decision making, your ability to manage your checkbook, to go grocery shopping, to buy gas and not let your car run out of gas. All those things go away. So your whole thought process of reasoning, function go away. Do you still eat a lot of food? Yeah, you still eat a lot of food. But your things in life become your children. Oops, what children? I forgot to pick them up to school today. I didn't pay my bills last month. I didn't go to work today. So, but the bottom line is, chronic marijuana users that we've dealt with, I have personally dealt with a lot of them. They completely seem to lose it. Especially after about 10 years, they're just not functional.
But, so let's say we have an officer that used for like 10 years and then hasn't used for another 10 years and wants to, or somebody that wants to become an officer, will you still have the same damage to like the frontal lobe and the reasoning and
It does get, when someone smokes pot for 10 years and stops, it does get better. There is a test, there is a process that we can test for in the laboratory that will determine, because if you're big like I am and I smoke pot every day and then I want to get in shape and become a police officer, not at 62, but you know what I mean. If I start working out, all that marijuana that's stored in my fat for 10 years is going to start coming out my urine. However, there is a way to do a THC creatinine ratio to show that it's going down. So we have a woman once that had marijuana after 90 days that she had stopped, but we did a THC creatinine ratio every week, and we showed that her ratio went down and down until it disappeared. So she was telling the truth that she's not smoking any new pot, she's on a diet, and she was a chronic user, and it gets better. The brain thing, there still seem to be, a lot of people my age that grew up in the 60s, they're still whacked out.
so there's nothing that can create the neurogenesis to heal the damage from the excessive use.
But there's nothing like someone who's been chronically on it for 10 years and is still on it versus someone who stops. You will see a tremendous difference in them being able to be responsible, to hold a job, pay their bills, get healthy food to eat, those types of things. You will see a massive improvement in that. But there is some permanent damage that you will have, especially lungs, just from smoking. Joints are horrible on your lungs and stuff like that. You may have cancer, things like that you can't fix, but you'll see an improvement with it, but you'll never see 100% recovery if someone's been on it for 10 years.
So what would the cutoff time be?
It depends on the person.
Okay.
Yeah, it's how bad. I have some professors that I had when I was in graduate school. I don't think they'll ever be normal. because that's all they did was smoke pot, all day, all night, and I don't think if they stopped, they'd ever get better. But I do know some people personally that were smoking pot for 5, 10 years and stopped, and they've actually become much better citizens than they ever were before. So I know people can get better. How much better? I don't think it's ever 100%, but it is a huge improvement.
Let me ask another question. Does it make a difference because of the developing brain? So somebody like at 18 smokes it from like 18 to 24, quits, wants to get into law enforcement during that crucial time that the frontal lobe is still being developed.
I've read both studies where kids have the ability to correct their physiological more than an older person. And then I've read studies where if you take it during your growth ages, it's actually causes more permanent impairment than it does if you're older. So I've read both stories.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is very helpful.
Well, yeah, it's just, there's a lot of changes out there, but this is why. They're getting away from I ever smoked it to are you under the influence right now? That's the trends that we're seeing. So, yes, sir.
Just considering some of the testing and kind of the sensitivity of the testing, I've heard this term before, contact high. Just also the confluence of there being that much more prevalence in environments where officers would be patrolling or interacting, subway, confined spaces. Is that something that would be tested or would come out in the test as a false, not necessarily a false positive, but something that is?
So that's a court issue just as much as the, under the influence or not influence issue, because the sensitivity to instrumentation nowadays, if the gentleman in the yellow tie were to smoke a joint in here during our whole meeting, I could test her this afternoon and get a positive urine marijuana test easily with the sensitivity. But the government has established cutoffs so that would not, they try to establish cutoffs so she would be below the cutoff and be negative. So they did it. Now the federal government, you may or may not know this for your DOT and your federal employees, they changed the morphine cutoff from 2,000 to 4,000 because they kept having people do poppy seed smoothies with raw poppy seeds, put some banana, strawberries, yogurt milk in there, and they're all positive, they're exceeding the 2,000 nanogram morphine limit, and they're not doing heroin, they're not doing opiates. So they changed it from 2,000 to 4,000. Now DOT rejected that February 1st, but they're still working on it to implement it at a later date. But for federal HHS employees now, the morphine level is 4,000 nanograms, which is a lot. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I'm curious to know what would that cutoff be? So I worry about the contact. And
Yeah, so
as the gentleman
it's
said,
absolutely true. If you're in a car and someone's smoking pot or you have a bong in there or whatever, everybody in that car is going to be positive because you inhale the smoke, it's going to come out in your urine. It's in this room where a cutoff level, she would probably be negative. Some people close to you may be positive, you'd for sure be positive, but they've tried to adjust the cutoff levels with both oral fluid and urine, and they've worked on hair a little bit to try and eliminate that contamination. But we have children all the time. We do a lot of child protective services testing in the United States. We see an incredible amount of kids positive for amp, meth, marijuana, fentanyl, and they're not doing it themselves. They're either, well, some of them are putting their hands on the coffee table and in their mouth with fatalities, but they're just in the room, they're in the house where people are doing meth, and they're positive for meth. At high levels, I mean, really high levels. Yes, sir.
I just want to double down on what Clyde is saying. Is it the same answer? I think Clyde is talking about you in a different car. I think you're the same.
If you're in a no, everybody in that car is going to be positive. But if you're depends on the size of the space that someone's smoking marijuana in. Obviously, the bigger space, the less concentration of people are going to inhale. But that's always a thing to work out in court. When we're in court, is what's the proximity, what was the length of exposure, what's the cutoff. But if you have marijuana, someone at 300, like if he smoked a joint in this room and she's at 300, she was doing something in the corner too. It wasn't just secondhand smoke. So there are cutoffs there to establish that what's reasonable, what's not reasonable to expect based on what the prosecution and defense are saying about the case. Yes.
And a good lab would detect that and say that.
Yes. That's one, and I'm not bragging about federal labs or our lab, but the federal government, they're the meanest people to test nasty samples to us to see if we can detect that type of contamination, and they do that every 3 months. It's a nightmare. But that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make sure the laboratories can tell the difference between all these new drugs out there. So,
So, you know, I think if there ever comes a time when there's random drug testing for law enforcement, I think most of our officers would test positive every day because of the nature, going to running calls for service. Just about every apartment house you go into, there's the presence of marijuana in there.
yeah.
And sometimes as soon as you step up to a car and roll down the window, the air that comes out of it,
Yeah.
you know, it's just immediate
see that,
contact.
but, you know, you can always do a study, a blind study, taking urine from officers at the end of the day, don't have any names on them, test them to see what levels you get. And not only marijuana, but methamphetamine. If you go into a lot of houses and you're a police officer, you have a lot of meth houses, crack houses and all that you're going to get exposed from that as well. So it's a good question. But again, you can adjust your cutoff levels to reflect that type of exposure. So unless the officer's personally inhaling it themselves, they would not hit that cutoff. And that's what the cutoffs are for. We have some people that are prisoners that shouldn't be having any fentanyl, any heroin in their cell. That's why it's a level very low. But then we have the nurse out there that's doing poppy seed smoothies every day, and their level's 4,000. Her level's maybe 25 in a prison, 4,000 for the general public. That's what we're seeing right now, is the different levels are being adjusted, exactly what you're saying. If you're a police officer and they roll down the window and you're having to do this through the smoke to see their face, yeah, you're going to be inhaling the smoke.
A question in the gallery?
Just out of curiosity, do you know anything about testing that might be able to come out of the labs and conducted in the fields? Working in a correctional setting, we might not be able to get somebody, we might not be able to get a sample or get an officer sent for a sample as quickly as having the lab available. Is there any type of rapid testing or anything that's being developed?
There is, so again, you need to pick the cutoff. So there's rapid tests out there. They're not as accurate as $500,000 machines, but they will give you a picture. And what I would suggest to you, get the most sensitive, lowest cutoff you can in that situation. Then if you send it, let's say it's buprenorphine at 1 nanogram or something, which is very common in this locality, abuse. If you get that at 1 and you pop it, so it's on a collection cup that there's a positive, you can always send it to the laboratory and have an established cutoff of 10 if you want. But you want to know anything to send to the lab, then I get the lowest levels of an instant product that you can. But again, understand the instant product, it's okay, but it's not like these, you know, it's different between $2 and $500,000. So that's what you're going to get. Yes, sir.
So will those instant tests hold up in court?
Okay, some do and some don't, because normally every time I go to court, you have to have a multi-testing process, a forensically defensible process. 2 independent tests with different methodologies, finding the same result, never lost in court. When you have a cup and you didn't do the testing of the cup and you only do 1 testing in the laboratory, that opens yourself up to a non-forensic test in court. Because you didn't do the collection, you didn't witness the collection, you have no idea whose urine it is. So when you get it in the laboratory, you only do the 1 confirmation test, you're not doing a forensic test anymore, you're simply doing a confirmation. So you'd have to get the collector of the original device, who collected it, when it was collected, all that type of stuff. So normally when we do all of our agencies that we do forensic testing for, we do both the screening and the confirmation in the lab. That way it's a forensically defensible test, all wrapped up into 1 licensed, monitored, inspected laboratory.
So you reference, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, just to add on top of what Dr. O'Coin's saying, we have customers that use rapid devices because they have a purpose. It's a screening purpose. They use those and they will simply seal under chain of custody, send to the laboratory, we re-screen and confirm. So that's always an option for you as well. So just know that. And just for all of you to understand, we as a SAMHSA certified laboratory, we are also an FDA medical device manufacturer. We also provide and manufacture oral fluid rapids and urine rapid products as well. And we put those programs together so that it is defensible in court. So we can help you in more information if you need for those type of things as well.
So you reference, it's your cutoff. You come on saying it's your cutoff, it's what your cutoff is. So is that, I guess it's 20 plus agencies here. Every agency could theoretically have their own cutoff?
Yeah, we have, the confirmation equipment determines the concentration of the drug. We plug that into our computer system. It then applies your cutoff. You could have a 26.985 cutoff for marijuana, and the computer would take that, apply it to what we found, determine whether it's negative or positive based on your cutoff. Because the purpose of each of your tests may be different. If you're a police officer and you know they're exposed to methamphetamine and marijuana, you don't want to have a super, super low level that's at one spit in 10 Olympic swimming pools. You don't want to detect at that level. You want to detect, are they doing it themselves? Not were they exposed to it that day. But if you're a correctional officer and they're not supposed to have anything ever be around any methamphetamine, do any methamphetamine, you may want to have a 25. I mean, a 25 versus a 2,000.
So I guess my second part, I guess for our certifications, we are dictating it, or is that coming from the commission? You know what I mean, as far as the cutoff?
The commission determines the cutoff, but we would do that in consultation with subject matter experts.
Okay. And dictate back to the agencies, you're not in compliance, or?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we operate any cutoff that the client contracts with us for. And some are very strange, and we don't know why, but they just are. So, you have a question back there?
I was just going to say that correction officers are basically in the same position because on the tier, they may breathe it in all day.
Yeah.
And so you can't have that low level because they will all test positive. I will test positive for just going through the tiers myself. That's it. So we have to take that into consideration.
Yeah, but the people you're testing may have different cutoffs than you personally would have because they're not supposed to be around it, touch it, smoke it, vape it, anything. So, yeah, there may be different levels between what you're tested at and what the people that you're servicing would be tested at.
Sir, Major, I want to clarify one thing. Remember, the commission establishes the minimum standards. An agency can obviously establish more higher standards.
Yeah. And again, we do get called into negotiations with agencies and give our recommendation, but you guys are exactly 100% right. It's who are you testing? What is their exposure and what's the purpose of the testing? Did they walk by a person smoking pot in the street today and you want to pick that up? Or do you want to pick up, did they personally smoke a joint today and you want that to be detected? So that's why we work with agencies to develop those cutoffs. Yes, sir.
So do you currently contract with other states as their expert?
Many.
And could you give us an idea of what the average of the cutoff is with your other clients?
The agencies tend to go with the federal government's cutoffs. For urine, oral fluid, hair, even though the government has not approved hair, they did lay out cutoffs that they recommended for hair about 5 years ago. So a lot of agencies will go with that, and they'll use that as a basis. And then they'll adjust based on what their specific situations are. But again, it's not the states that are different states are different, it's different agencies, like the Department of Corrections for Pennsylvania, Department of Corrections for California or Los Angeles. They tend to be lower because they want to know, these guys aren't supposed to be doing anything. They're not supposed to be around it, touch it, smell it, be exposed to it, and if their friend's smoking pot, they're told to get away. Those levels tend to be very low. When you get higher and higher up the federal type standards, the cutoffs seem to go up and up and up. So you do eliminate that police officer who has to be around pot and meth all day long. You don't want them being positive, only if they're personally doing it. And you'll see a difference. You'll see the 20, 30, 40, 50 nanogram exposure. They do it themselves. It pops up in the hundreds or the thousands. So it's not a difficult line to draw.
All right. I'd like to kind of wrap this up. I think you've done a phenomenal job with your presentation.
I wish I had all day, but I'm sorry.
I'm going to get your all day part. I see on page 9 you have contact information.
Yes.
Are you open to email?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And by the way, we've been servicing the state for over 10 years with contracts. So I've been here many times doing presentations and training. So, and we're happy to always do that for any agency, no matter if you have a contract with us or not. There's only 18 labs left licensed in the federal government, so we try to do our public service as well.
So I'd say at some point, we're all going to go back and put our minds together and start thinking about different things with our folks and shoot off an email to you.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Duda.
Yes.